Welcome to the deep dive. We have a very specific mission for today's session, tailored for you listening right now. We're going through this massive stack of reading,
Yeah, really massive stack.
right? I mean, books, analytical essays, scientifically backed frameworks, and we set out to extract the ultimate grounded blueprint for success.
Which is a pretty ambitious target when you say it out loud. But when you synthesize all this material, a surprisingly practical roadmap actually does start to emerge.
It really does. We're pulling heavy insights today from James Clear's Atomic Habits, Ash Ali, and Hassan Kuba's book, The Unfair Advantage, alongside some deep analysis of the fundamental traits that seem to guarantee success across literally any field.
But before we get into the daily mechanics of, how to be successful, there is a giant elephant in the room we have to address,
Oh,
which
definitely.
is defining what success actually means in the first place.
Mm.
What's fascinating here is that success is entirely subjective, yet society loves to hand us these pre-packaged generic goals.
Yeah, you know the ones. Become a millionaire, climb to the corporate ladder, get the massive house.
Exactly. And if you just adopt those defaults without any critical thought, you run the risk of perfectly executing a plan that makes you completely miserable.
I was really struck by how the material breaks that down. You have to define the target for yourself. For you, maybe success is simply being happily married, raising great kids, and having a peaceful life.
Which is a beautiful, complete goal.
Totally. But then you look at someone like Elon Musk, and his definition of success is figuring out how to colonize Mars. Or take Arnold Schwarzenegger.
His trajectory is a perfect example of defining a highly specific, very personal version of success.
It really is. His definition of winning was becoming a multi-time Mr. Olympia, and then a Hollywood leading man, and then the governor of California.
Right.
Those are three completely different arenas and three totally different definitions of winning the game.
And the foundational premise we have to start with is that until you know what your specific version of success looks like, none of the tactics we're about to discuss will do you any good.
None at all.
But once you have that target firmly in your mind, we can start looking at the tools required to hit it. And that brings us to what's often referred to as the unofficial fourth secret to success.
Okay, let's unpack this. This is the prerequisite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolute, unwavering self-belief.
Exactly that. It is the engine that drives everything else.
The reading uses Kanye West as a prime example of this. Regardless of how you feel about him personally, you cannot deny his unapologetic belief in his own genius.
Oh, absolutely.
He operated from day one under the assumption that whatever he touched was going to be culturally defining. And going back to Arnold Schwarzenegger for a second, think at how almost delusional his self-belief had to be.
It's wild to think about.
Right. He was a farmer from a poor background in Austria with a very thick accent. He looked at his life and genuinely thought, I'm going to go to America, dominate a bodybuilding sport that nobody currently cares about, become a leading man in movies where everyone usually looks like Robert Redford, and then run a state with one of the largest economies on the planet.
It sounds objectively irrational, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, there's a reason this kind of belief works. There is incredible wisdom tracing all the way back to ancient Greek philosophy.
Like Aristotle and Plato.
Yeah, thinkers like that. It essentially boils down to this. If you think you can do something, it's true. And if you think you can't, it's also true.
I mean, that sounds a bit like a motivational poster. Is there actual science backing that up?
It's actually a profound psychological reality. Humans act in accordance with their core beliefs. If you fundamentally believe you are meant for greatness, you will naturally put in the grueling effort required to get there.
Because you think the payoff is guaranteed.
Right. But if you don't actually believe it, you will subconsciously sabotage yourself or talk yourself out of even trying when things get hard.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at the biological side of it. There was this incredibly relatable story I read in our research about a psychological phenomenon called the reticular activating system, or RAS. Have you heard of this?
The brain's filtering mechanism, right?
Yeah. So there's this guy who decides he wants to buy a very specific car, a white Chevy Camaro. He's so obsessed with it, he even names the car Sylvia.
Okay.
Before he actually bought Sylvia, he never really noticed Camaros on the road. They were just background traffic. But the second he buys this specific car, suddenly he is seeing white Chevy Camaros everywhere he goes. He's like, oh, there's Sylvia's cousin. There's Sylvia's brother at the stoplight.
It's a brilliant illustration of how belief and focus physically alter our visual perception. Your brain receives billions of bits of information every single second.
Right, it's overwhelming.
It simply cannot process all of it, so the reticular activating system acts like a bouncer at a club, filtering out almost everything. But once you set your focus on a specific goal,
Once you program that bouncer.
exactly, once you program that bouncer with a clear target, your brain suddenly starts letting in the opportunities, the connections, and the pathways that help you get there. Those opportunities were always around you. They were just invisible before.
Okay, so once we have that target and we've programmed our brain with that self-belief, how do we actually execute on a random Tuesday? This is where we get into the daily mechanics and specifically the power of compounding. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits with the 1% rule. The math behind it is wild.
It really is. The premise is that if you just get 1% better every single day by the end of a given year, you aren't just a little bit better, you are statistically 37 times better than when you started.
But it was a massive catch here that people run into, isn't there? The materials kept warning about something called the plateau of latent potential.
That is the trap where most people fail. We are conditioned to expect progress to be linear. You put in a day of hard work, you want to see a day of tangible results.
Right, instant gratification.
But compounding doesn't work like that at all. The outcomes are heavily delayed. This creates a gap between what you expect to happen and what is actually happening, which Clear calls the valley of disappointment.
Because you're putting in the effort, you're making those 1% daily changes, and when you look in the mirror or check your bank account, nothing seems to be happening.
And that is the critical threshold where the vast majority of people just give up.
Which brings up a concept that totally threw me off at first. The recommendation from the source is to completely screw goals, which sounds crazy. We literally just spent the first 10 minutes talking about defining your goal. Why would we suddenly abandon it?
It feels counterintuitive, but the argument is that we need to start fixating on the destination and instead focus our energy entirely on our systems.
Yeah.
Think about the Olympics. Every single athlete at the starting line of the 100-meter dash has the exact same goal. They all want the gold medal. So having the goal clearly isn't the variable that differentiates the winner from the loser.
Oh, that's a great point. The goal doesn't dictate the outcome.
Not at all. Furthermore, achieving a goal only changes your life for a single, fleeting moment. Imagine your room is a total disaster, and you finally summon the willpower to clean it. Congratulations, you achieved your goal.
But the room just gets messy again.
Right. If you don't change the messy habits, the underlying system that led to the room getting messy in the first place, you'll be staring at a disaster zone again by next week. Goals also fundamentally restrict your happiness because you trap yourself in a mindset of, I'll finally be happy when I achieve this thing.
That reminds me of a quote from Bill Walsh, the legendary Super Bowl winning coach. He famously said, "The score takes care of itself."
That's a perfect analogy.
If you're playing a game, obviously the goal is to have the most points on the scoreboard when the clock runs out. But if you spend the entire game just staring up at the scoreboard, you're going to lose. You have to focus on the process, the individual plays, the strategy on the field. The purpose of a goal is to win the game. But the purpose of a system is to continue playing the game indefinitely.
And building a system that lasts requires a fundamental shift in how we view ourselves. This is where the shift from outcome-based change to identity-based change becomes incredibly important.
I really want to dig into this because the example used in the research hit really close to home. Let's say you want to lose some belly fat. The typical outcome-based approach is saying, I'm going to force myself to go on this strict Tim Ferriss low-carb diet so I can eventually look like Zac Efron.
Right, and that's a constant, exhausting struggle because you're fighting against who you currently believe you are.
Exactly. But the identity-based approach flips the script entirely. You don't start with the diet. You start with the belief. You say, I am a healthy person. And because I am a healthy person, I naturally eat wholesome food and I exercise regularly. You change the core identity first, and the habits just sort of follow as a natural byproduct of who you now are.
To help actually install those identity-based habits, behavioral science breaks down habit formation into 4 distinct laws: cue, craving, response, and reward. If you want a good habit to stick or a bad habit to break, you have to manipulate these 4 stages.
I'd love to walk through these because the real-world examples make this so much less abstract. The first law is about the cue, make it obvious. How does that actually look in practice?
Well, the research highlights a great example. There was a guy who knew he needed to take his daily vitamin D pills, but he kept forgetting. However, he never forgot to take his hair loss finasteride tablets because that was already a deeply ingrained identity-based habit for him.
Oh, so he stacked them.
Exactly. Instead of trying to build a new habit from scratch, he simply moved the vitamin D bottle right next to the finasteride on the bathroom counter. The visual cue became unmissable, and the new habit effortlessly piggybacked on the old one.
That is so simple, but so effective.
Oh,
Okay, the second law is the craving. Make it attractive. I struggle with this one. How do you make something objectively difficult, like working out, attractive?
we are biologically driven by the anticipation of a dopamine hit. The trick here is pairing an action you need to do with an action you really want to do. For instance, you take your absolute favorite fantasy audiobooks or a podcast you love, and you create a strict rule. You are only allowed to listen to them while you are physically at the gym.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, you're actually craving your workout, not because you love the treadmill, but because it's the only time you get to find out what happens next in the story.
I'm definitely stealing that. The third law focuses on the response stage. Make it easy. This seems to be all about friction, right?
It is. There is a fantastic quote to keep in mind here. Friction is the most powerful force in the universe. Humans will almost always take the path of least resistance. So you have to engineer your environment to reduce friction for good habits and increase it for bad ones.
The example of learning an instrument really illustrates that. If you want to practice guitar more, keeping it packed away in a hard case in the back of your closet is creating massive friction.
Exactly.
Instead, you leave the guitar sitting on a stand right next to your work desk. That way, when you inevitably hit a wall with your work and want to procrastinate, picking up the guitar is the easiest, most frictionless distraction available.
And that brings us to the final law, the reward. Make it satisfying. Our brains are hardwired by evolution to prioritize immediate gratification over delayed rewards. The compounding benefits of going to the gym might take 6 months to show up in the mirror. Your brain doesn't want to wait 6 months for a reward.
So you have to manufacture an immediate win to trick your brain.
Precisely. A great example from the material is someone who, immediately after a grueling workout, would reward themselves by going straight to the spa or sitting by the pool to read a book for 20 minutes in total peace. It made the entire exhausting process immediately satisfying, which practically guaranteed they'd want to show up again the next day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, once you have your identity-based systems humming along, using those 4 laws, you have to look outward at the environment you're operating in. And this is where we have to introduce a very hard, somewhat uncomfortable truth. Life is not a level playing field.
It really isn't, and pretending it is can be incredibly discouraging. This is the core thesis of Ash Ali and Hazan Kuba's The Unfair Advantage. They shatter the myth that success is purely the result of hard work. Success is actually an equation. It is a mix of fair play and unfair advantages.
Fair play is the stuff we all know and respect. It's the startup founder who wakes up at 3 a.m. to hustle, runs 10 miles, and works a 14-hour day. Anyone technically can choose to do that. But if that exact same founder also happens to have wealthy parents who casually drop a $500,000 investment into their startup on day 1, that is an unfair advantage. No amount of waking up at 3 a.m. can easily replicate that for a regular person.
It's a reality check. But the brilliant, empowering insight from their work is that everyone, including you listening right now, possesses a unique set of unfair advantages. You just haven't identified them yet. They created a framework to help you find your edge called the Miles Framework, M-I-L-E-S.
Let's run through these, because looking at success through this lens is eye-opening. What does the M stand for?
Money. It's the most obvious one. Having capital gives you runway, and it removes the existential stress of paying rent so you can take bigger risks.
Evan Spiegel is a perfect example of this. He co-founded Snapchat and became the youngest self-made billionaire at 24. Did he work incredibly hard? Yes, absolutely. But he also grew up in a multi-million-dollar house with powerful, highly connected lawyer parents who could introduce him to tech CEOs that regular people could never get in a room with. Money is an undeniable advantage. What about the I?
Intelligence and insight. Raw intellectual horsepower, or a unique way of seeing a problem. Look at the Collison brothers, who founded Stripe, the multi-billion-dollar payment processing company.
Oh man, their story is wild. One of the brothers literally invented his own programming language at age 16 and left school early for MIT.
Right.
The other had the highest test scores in his entire country and was accepted into Harvard before he even took his final exams.
Exactly. You can't just hustle your way into that level of innate cognitive ability. It's an unfair advantage. Next is L, for location and luck.
Ray Krutok, the guy who turned McDonald's into a global empire, was very vocal about this. He explicitly said that a huge part of major success is simply being in the right place at the right time. If you're building a tech startup, being physically located in Silicon Valley gives you an edge over someone building in a small rural town.
Then we have E, which stands for education and expertise. It's not just about what you know, but the signaling power of where you learned it. If a medical student at Cambridge University decides to start a YouTube channel giving study advice, they can heavily leverage the prestige of the Cambridge brand. It signals instant authority and credibility to viewers, an advantage a student at a lesser-known community college would have to spend years trying to build from scratch.
And finally, S stands for status. Once you reach a certain level of status, the rules just change.
Yeah.
Everything gets easier. Elon Musk can launch a new product, give it the most ridiculous, unpronounceable name imaginable, and it will still dominate global headlines instantly simply because he is Elon Musk.
Now, a really vital point here is how we interact with the concept of luck. People think luck is just a lightning bolt from the sky, but you can actually manufacture it. The authors call it creating a surface area for serendipity.
Surface area for serendipity. Love that phrasing. How do you increase that surface area?
By taking relentless action, going to networking events, publishing your thoughts online, cold emailing people, just putting your work out into the world, you are drastically increasing the statistical probability that a lucky break will bump into you.
And what's really encouraging is that what you might perceive as a massive disadvantage right now can actually be flipped into your greatest unfair advantage. Let's say you're starting a business and you have absolutely zero money. That sounds like a death sentence for a startup.
But having no money forces you to be incredibly creative. Necessity really is the mother of invention. A founder with endless venture capital cash will often just lazily burn through it, buying expensive Google ads to cover up the fact that their product isn't very good. But the broke founder, they have to build something people genuinely love and want to share because they literally cannot afford to pay for attention.
Navigating all of this requires a very specific mental framing. The research calls it the reality growth mindset. We've all heard of Carol Dweck's famous study with the 10-year-olds, where the kids with a fixed mindset fell apart when a puzzle got too hard. But the kids with a growth mindset loved the challenge.
Yes, the reality growth mindset takes that foundational idea and matures it for the real world. It's about having your head in the clouds, believing you can achieve remarkable things, but keeping your feet firmly rooted on the ground. It is the delicate balance of massive self-belief combined with a very sober, honest self-awareness of your current limitations and your specific miles advantages.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Once you have your subjective goal, your identity-based habits, and an awareness of your unfair advantages, how do you actually survive the long, grueling journey to get there? Because it's not going to be easy.
It's going to be incredibly difficult, which is why the final piece of the puzzle is a scientifically backed trinity of execution. 3 traits you absolutely must possess to weather the storm. The first one is grit.
How is grit defined in this context? Because people throw that word around a lot.
It's defined brilliantly and simply. Grit is the ability to fail repeatedly without losing your enthusiasm.
That immediately makes me think of John Paul DeJoria. Before he became a billionaire with his hair care empire, his job was literally walking door to door, trying to sell heavy, printed encyclopedias and dictionaries. Can you imagine a more soul-crushing job?
No, it sounds brutal.
He had doors slammed in his face from morning until night. But his grit was that he kept knocking, bringing the exact same level of enthusiasm at door number 100 as he had on door number 1. Or look at Kobe Bryant.
His origin story is a masterclass in grit.
Right. The story of him as a 14-year-old going to a basketball camp in Italy. He got absolutely crushed by the older kids. He realized in that moment that he didn't have the natural unfair advantage of raw physical talent that the other kids had. But instead of quitting, he decided he would simply outwork every single one of them for the next 10 years. That's grit.
The second trait in the Trinity is consistency. If grit is the emotional resilience, consistency is the mechanical execution. It's about putting in the reps and the sets day after day, regardless of how motivated you feel.
There were 2 vivid examples of this that stuck with me. One was a story of a guy who suffered from terrible childhood asthma. He was put on steroids that ended up causing severe obesity. To fix his health, he couldn't just have one really great workout. He had to go to the gym relentlessly, week after week, year after year, fully embracing the boring reps and sets of life.
Because motivation fades.
Exactly. And the same guy used to struggle with a terrible stutter. He would mumble and couldn't speak clearly. his solution.
Pure consistency.
Exactly. He woke up at 5 a.m. every single morning, turned on a camera, and just spoke into it for 5 minutes straight. No audience, no script, just getting the reps in. Over time, that relentless consistency cured his stutter and turned him into a highly confident speaker.
And that leads perfectly into the third and final trait, iteration. This might actually be the most misunderstood concept of the three. Iteration simply means making small, continuous tweaks based on the feedback you're getting in order to eventually reach your goal.
Nobody gets it right on the first try. Pablo Picasso didn't just walk up to a canvas, paint one perfect, world-changing masterpiece and retire. He constantly tweaked his style over decades. A video editor might publish a video, look at the analytics, see that people clicked away after 10 seconds, and then iterate by adding faster jump cuts or bold subtitles to retain attention better on the next video. Even people society labels as overnight successes are usually just masters of iteration.
The Paul brothers, Logan and Jake, are a great modern example of this. People look at their massive wealth and think they just got famous instantly because they're young and loud. But the reality is they started making videos when they were 8 years old. They iterated for years with zero audience. They eventually built a massive following on Vine, and when Vine shut down, they didn't quit. They iterated again, pivoting to YouTube comedy. When that landscape changed, they iterated into podcasting, and then, incredibly, they iterated into professional boxing. It wasn't overnight luck. It was a decade of continuous tweaking, fueled by grit and consistency.
So what does this all mean for you? Let's connect all these dots and summarize the blueprint. To achieve truly remarkable results, the very first thing you have to do is sit down in a quiet room and define what success actually means to you, ignoring whatever society is shouting at you. From there, you adopt a reality growth mindset. You look honestly at your life through the Miles framework and figure out what your specific unfair advantages are. You abandon goal obsession and instead build identity-based systems using the 4 laws of behavior change. And finally, you arm yourself with grit, consistency, and a willingness to constantly iterate so you can push straight through that valley of disappointment.
This raises an important question, though, and it's a thought I want you, the listener, to really chew on as we wrap up. If we know that having fewer resources can actually force immense creativity, and if we know that perceived disadvantages can be flipped into our greatest unfair advantages, what if the very thing you consider your absolute biggest failure or worst flaw right now is actually the exact raw material you need to build your ultimate identity-based system?
Wow, that is a deeply provocative thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope unpacking these insights gives you the blueprint you need to build something incredible on your own terms. Keep questioning, keep learning, and above all, keep iterating. We'll catch you on the next one.